Crew-kicked black teen. Off plane. Laughing his aunt. Shut the airline down. Have you ever heard a story so shocking, so heartbreaking, that you couldn't help but lean in and listen to every single detail? Picture a young black teenager, excited for his first solo trip, only to be thrown off an airplane by a crew that mocked and belittled him. They laughed as they left him, stranded and humiliated, in front of an entire cabin of stunned passengers. Little did they know his aunt was an unstoppable force, a woman with the tenacity of a warrior. What followed was an epic showdown that would bring an entire airline to its knees, ready for a wild journey. 15-year-old Marcus Gilbert had never felt more exhilarated in his life. He was headed to Atlanta for a summer camp focused on leadership and technology, a dream come true for a curious, tech-savvy kid with aspirations of becoming an engineer. Growing up in the small town of Oakfield, Tennessee, Marcus had never been on an airplane before. Flying represented freedom, possibility, and a glimpse of a wider world he only knew from the internet and television. His aunt, Dr. Elena Marshall, was the one who had orchestrated the entire trip, a sharp-minded civil rights advocate and a well-known activist with connections to the NAACP. Dr. Marshall believed in pushing her loved ones to seize every educational opportunity. Although she lived in Atlanta, she wanted Marcus to learn independence, so he would be traveling solo from Memphis International Airport to Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta. International Airport, she promised to pick him up at the gate, and together they'd head straight for the campus tour. Marcus's mother, Alicia, was uneasy about letting her son travel alone. But Eleanor, brimming with confidence, reassured her younger sister that it would be an excellent learning experience. Marcus had saved up for months to afford a new laptop for the camp, excitedly counting down the days to this trip. He would often say, "Aunt Elena always finds a way to make impossible things happen." That Tuesday morning was crisp with promise. As Marcus and Alicia pulled into the Memphis International Airport, Marcus felt a mixture of nervous excitement. Alicia double-checked his boarding pass, real ID and itinerary. She gave him an encouraging hug and a few last-minute reminders. Be respectful. Speak clearly. Stay alert and don't hesitate to call me or your aunt if anything feels off. The security process was uneventful. Just the typical lines, a check of his ID, the scanning of his backpack, and the wave through. Marcus sat patiently at gate A17, thinking about how he'd text Aunt Elena once they started boarding. He noticed families, business travelers, and even a few fellow teenagers waiting around. He scrolled through social media, posted a quick update about his flight, and daydreamed about the advanced robotics workshop at camp. He had no inkling that the next few hours would leave him with a memory so painful, so humiliating, that it would spark a firestorm of national attention and bring an entire airline to the brink of destruction. The boarding call came, and Marcus joined the line. The flight was with Sky One Airways, a relatively new company that prided itself on budget-friendly tickets and efficient service. Though smaller than giants like Delta or American Airlines, Sky One was trying to cement its reputation in the competitive travel market. Their marketing promised courtesy, comfort, and convenience. 3 C's that had enticed cost-conscious travelers for the past few years. Marcus found his seat, 11A, next to the window. He stored his carry-on under the seat in front of him, excitedly buckling his seatbelt. Around him, other passengers settled in. A flight attendant, a short woman with a sharply pressed uniform named Rhonda, passed by to check overhead bins and seatbelts. "Hi," Marcus said politely, when she caught his eye, offering a nervous smile. Rhonda gave a curt nod, not responding verbally. Marcus tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was just busy. After all, flight attendants had a lot to handle before takeoff. He turned his attention back to his phone, sending Aunt Elena a quick message. "We're on the plane. Talk soon." A few minutes later, Rhonda returned, joined by another flight attendant, Gary, a lanky man with an officious air about him. They stopped at Marcus's row. Rhonda looked down at him. "Excuse me, young man. Could I see your boarding pass?" Marcus blinked. "Sure." He retrieved the pass from his jacket pocket and handed it over, wondering if something was wrong with his seat assignment. Rhonda scrutinized the ticket, passing it to Gary. They exchanged a glance. Gary asked, "Who are you traveling with?" "I'm traveling alone." Marcus answered, feeling a prick of anxiety. "My aunt is picking me up in Atlanta." Gary handed the boarding pass back without a word and abruptly walked down the aisle. Rhonda remained. Her expression, which had been carefully neutral moments ago, seemed to shift into mild suspicion. Marcus wondered what could have sparked their interest. He felt a quiver of self-consciousness, aware that he was one of only a handful of black passengers on the flight. He brushed off the thought, reminding himself that flight attendants had lots of reasons to double-check tickets. When the safety demonstration began, Marcus tried to concentrate, but he couldn't shake a sense of unease. The flight attendants seemed to linger in his row, whispering with each other and glancing in his direction. Other passengers noticed too. An older woman sitting across the aisle from Marcus frowned, seeming perplexed. "Everything okay, dear?" she asked quietly. Marcus shrugged, forcing a smile. "I think so." The plane taxied onto the runway, and Marcus felt the usual jolt of the engines, revving the surge of adrenaline as the aircraft lifted off. For a few blissful minutes, he forgot about the strange looks and told himself everything was fine. He gazed out the window, marveling at the patchwork of farmland and city sprawl below. Then, just as they reached cruising altitude, Gary returned to Marcus's row. He leaned over with an air of menace that made Marcus's heart pound. "We need to speak with you in the galley," he said, nodding toward the front of the aircraft. Marcus's chest tightened. He unbuckled his seatbelt, grabbing his phone and leaving his backpack. Passengers looked on curiously as he walked down the aisle. Inside the cramped galley near the cockpit door, the tension became almost suffocating. Rhonda stood there, arms folded. Gary positioned himself beside her, blocking Marcus from returning to his seat. "We have reason to believe you're in the wrong seat," Rhonda said coldly. Marcus swallowed. "But my seat number is 11A. That's what my boarding pass says. Did I do something wrong? You're traveling alone. And you appeared to be loitering near the flight deck before departure," Gary said, so his voice trailed off uncertainly. Marcus felt his face flush. "I never loitered near the flight deck. I boarded and went straight to my seat," Rhonda frowned. "That's not what one of the crew members saw." Marcus's mind raced. Why would anyone claim he was near the cockpit? He'd never left his seat, except for this very moment when they summoned him. None of it made sense. "We need to check the passenger manifest," Rhonda announced, as if unveiling a crucial piece of evidence. She tapped her tablet a few times, then glanced back at Marcus. "Can you confirm your full name and birth date again?" He repeated it, voice quivering. "Marcus Gilbert, born June 21st, 20. Gary cut him off. "We're not finding you. That can't be right," Marcus protested, growing frightened. "I have my boarding pass right here on my phone, too." He fumbled to open the confirmation email. Rhonda glanced at Gary Security. "Concerns are no joke, especially these days," she said pointedly. Gary nodded. Marcus displayed his phone, the official Sky One confirmation complete with his name and seat number. He scrolled to show his flight details. "It's all here," he said, his voice shaky but firm. Rhonda's gaze flickered to the screen. For a moment, Marcus saw hesitation in her eyes, as though she realized there was indeed a ticket that matched Marcus's details. Then, in a bizarre shift, Gary tilted his head back and let out a short, humorless laugh. "All right, kid. Enough with the attitude. We have to remove you from the flight." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Well, why?" Rhonda smirked. "TSA guidelines. If we have any doubt about a passenger's legitimacy, or if they pose a security risk, we have the authority to remove them." "This is ridiculous." The words flew out of Marcus's mouth before he could stop them. He felt his heart hammering, tears of indignation burning his eyes. "I haven't done anything wrong." Gary's eyes narrowed. "Attitude. That's enough." In the cramped galley, Marcus could feel the aircraft rumbling and the hush of stunned passengers behind the drawn curtain. Rhonda pressed a phone to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. Moments later, she turned to Marcus, face composed. "We've spoken with the captain and the ground crew. We're diverting to Chattanooga Metropolitan Airport. You'll be taken off there." Marcus stared open-mouthed. "Why, I don't understand, Gary." Let out another laugh, this one tinged with cruelty. "You can explain it to security when we land. Let's go. Please." Marcus said, his voice trembling. "I'm just a kid going to a summer camp. You can call my mum or my aunt, Rhonda." Shrugged. "We'll handle that once we're on the ground." The next 30 minutes were a blur of shock and dread. Marcus, forced to stand in the galley, listened to the flight attendant's radio. The captain passengers in the cabin remained oblivious to the details, but rumors circulated in hushed whispers. Someone had seen a commotion. Others peered down the aisle, but the closed curtain blocked their view. When the plane landed in Chattanooga, a team of security personnel and airline representatives boarded. Marcus was escorted off as onlookers stared. He heard hushed gasps, saw people craning their necks to see what was happening, and felt tears welling up as humiliation settled on his shoulders. Gary and Rhonda followed behind, and the second they stepped onto the jet bridge, Marcus could hear them snickering. "All that trouble for a wannabe troublemaker," Gary said. "Can you believe the nerve of this kid?" Rhonda shook her head, an incredulous grin twisting her lips. What a day. Marcus's humiliation morphed into anger. The laughter cut deeper than any official accusations. He'd done nothing wrong. Yet here he was, paraded around like a criminal. Little did Gary and Rhonda know. Their cruel smirks were about to set in motion a downfall nobody could have predicted. After disembarking, Marcus was taken to a small conference room in the airport, where 2 Sky One representatives started peppering him with questions. A security officer asked for identification, which Marcus provided yet again. At first, the tone was stern, almost harsh. But once they saw he was indeed a minor who had valid documentation, confusion flickered across the airline reps' faces. "How did you get on the plane?" And Memphis asked, one glancing at the name tag pinned to her blazer. "Linda Watkins, airport liaison for Sky One. I checked in with the kiosk, showed my ID at the gate boarded, when they called Group B." Marcus explained, voice still quivering. "I didn't do anything different from anyone else." Linda sighed, rubbing her temple. "Your name is in the system, that's true. It matches your ID. So I'm not sure why the flight attendants singled you out." She exchanged a glance with the security officer, who looked equally perplexed. "I don't either," Marcus muttered, feeling tears threaten again, but he blinked them back, trying to keep his composure. 10 minutes later, Marcus was allowed to call his mother, Alicia, who had been anxiously awaiting news. Answered in a panic, Marcus broke down the story in between sobs. Her voice grew taut with anger as she demanded to speak to someone in authority. Before handing the phone to Linda, Marcus caught the woman's sympathetic gaze. At least Linda seemed to believe him. In a matter of moments, Alicia had called Aunt Elena on a three-way line. Elena, who was already in Atlanta, waiting at Hartsfield-Jackson, lost no time. After listening to a quick summary from Linda, she demanded explanations. Linda, stammering, admitted she had no direct knowledge of what happened on board, only that the lead flight attendant had insisted Marcus posed a security concern. Elena's voice crackled through the phone, dripping with controlled fury. "You have precisely 15 minutes to figure out a solution for my nephew. If I don't hear something sensible, I will not only pursue legal action, but I will see to it that the NAACP and several civil rights attorneys are looped in before you can blink. And let me be very clear, I do not make empty threats." Linda promised to do her best, though she sounded frazzled. Marcus, hearing his aunt in full protective mode, felt a surge of relief. Elena was a force of nature, known for her unyielding commitment to justice. If Aunt Elena said she'd move mountains, she would, nevertheless. Marcus was stranded in Chattanooga. The flight to Atlanta had continued without him. Sky One offered to rebook him on another flight, but Aunt Eleanor refused. "You will put him in a car, your expense, and transport him directly to me." She demanded. "I want him safe, and I want him out of your airline's custody immediately." Linda hesitated, but eventually agreed. Within half an hour, Marcus found himself in the back of a company car, flanked by a weary driver who had no idea about the swirl of controversy erupting around him. Marcus stared out the window as Chattanooga gave way to highway stretches. Emotions churned within him: fear, anger, humiliation. But above all, he felt a growing determination, a flicker of defiance. If Aunt Elena was on his side, maybe this wasn't over, Doctor. Eleanor Marshall wasn't just a civil rights advocate. She was a veritable powerhouse. At 38, she'd earned a PhD in sociology from Emory University, focusing on systemic discrimination within corporate structures. But her activism extended beyond academia. She regularly volunteered at the NAACP Atlanta branch and had fought several high-profile cases involving unlawful police harassment. Sky One's flight crew had no idea who they were up against. As soon as Marcus stepped out of the car at the curb outside Atlanta's airport, Elena enveloped him in a tight hug. She placed her hands on his shoulders, looking him in the eyes. "Are you all right, Marcus?" Nodded, tears threatening once more. "I'm sorry to make you worry. This is not your fault," Elena said, firmly pulling him into another hug. "Now come on. I've got us a place to talk about this with some friends." She led him through the airport terminal to an upscale coffee lounge where 3 individuals waited: Eric Johnson, an attorney from Morgan & Morgan, Teresa Neal, a prominent organizer at the NAACP, and James Carter, a local investigative journalist, known for his unflinching articles on race-related injustices. They all rose to greet Marcus, each offering sympathetic nods. Eric gave Marcus a fatherly pat on the back. "You've been through quite an ordeal, young man. Let's see what we can do to make this right." Marcus soon recounted the entire story. The retelling was agonizing, the embarrassment still fresh in his mind. He described Rhonda and Gary's suspicious questions, the humiliating removal, their laughter, and the final confusion in Chattanooga. Teresa Neal's eyes narrowed. "So they claimed you were a security risk without any actual evidence?" Marcus nodded. "They said my name wasn't on the manifest, but I showed them my boarding pass." It was right there. Elena leaned forward, her face stony, racial profiling plain and simple. Eric's expression was grim. "We can explore multiple avenues: discrimination, unlawful detainment, emotional distress. The tricky part is, airline regulations can be broad about removing passengers if crew members feel uncomfortable, but the laughter and humiliation is a strong angle. We'll need to investigate thoroughly. Marcus felt a surge of hope. These people weren't just listening, they were mobilizing James Carter, meanwhile tapped away on his laptop. Capturing every detail, I'll reach out to Sky One's press office for comment. Usually they'll trot out a canned statement. But let's see. Elena glanced at Marcus, then at the group. I want immediate accountability. Marcus nearly missed his summer camp, his educational opportunity, because of this nonsense. They didn't just inconvenience him, they traumatized him. This can't stand. Teresa nodded. We'll do everything we can. This is bigger than just Marcus. This is about setting a precedent that airlines can't hide behind vague security concerns to perpetuate discriminatory actions. Despite the heavy atmosphere, Marcus felt a flicker of relief. He wasn't alone in this fight. A sense of vindication, faint but growing, began to take hold. If Sky One thought they could sweep this under the rug, they had grossly underestimated the resourcefulness and determination of the people who loved him. Within 2 days, James Carter's write-up hit the internet, quickly circulating on local news sites and social media platforms. The headline read, "Black teen forced off Sky One flight on baseless accusations." The story included direct quotes from Marcus and Alicia, as well as commentary from Teresa Neal at the NAACP. Eleanor had also provided a succinct yet powerful statement. "My nephew was harassed, humiliated, and illegally removed. Sky One must be held accountable for its racially charged misconduct." Sky One's initial response was tepid. A short press release stated, "Sky One Airways is reviewing the circumstances of this incident. The safety and comfort of our passengers is our top priority. We maintain our right to remove any passenger whose behavior or documentation is in question." They offered no apology, no direct address of Marcus's specific situation. Social media exploded. Outraged comments flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hashtags like Direct Justice for Marcus and Sky One boycott gained traction, with influencers, activists, and celebrities weighing in. Within 48 hours, national news outlets started picking up the story. CNN ran a segment featuring a brief interview with Marcus and Alicia, both visibly shaken, yet determined to speak their truth. Then came the public statements from civil rights organizations. The NAACP strongly condemned Sky One, urging a thorough investigation. Community leaders in Atlanta and Memphis organized small but vocal protests at airports. A widely shared viral video from a passenger on the same flight showed part of the aftermath, capturing glimpses of flight attendants, Gary and Rhonda smirking as Marcus was led away. In the days that followed, corporate sponsors began distancing themselves from Sky One. Rumors swirled that the airline's board of directors was in crisis mode. Still, the top brass at Sky One seemed reluctant to offer more than perfunctory apologies. The leak of an internal memo which referred to Marcus as the passenger with questionable credentials ignited further outrage. The memo also allegedly warned staff not to engage with any media requests. For many, this sealed the perception that Sky One was doubling down on denial rather than taking responsibility. Elena saw the chaos unfolding with both anger and satisfaction. She hated that Marcus had suffered, but if it shined a spotlight on a larger systemic issue, then perhaps good could come out of the tragedy. Behind the scenes, Eric Johnson was assembling a formidable legal team. Teresa Neal was rallying civil rights groups to demand policy reforms, and James Carter continued his dogged reporting, uncovering more damning information about Sky One's track record of passenger complaints. Amid the swirl of public discourse, Marcus tried to resume a semblance of normalcy. He attended his summer camp. Though he arrived a day late, still reeling from the experience, his classmates showed support. Some even wearing T-shirts that read, "Not a security risk, just a kid in solidarity." The sense of belonging at the camp soothed Marcus's wounded spirit, but whenever he closed his eyes, he could still see Gary's mocking grin and hear that dismissive laughter. As the legal team dug deeper into Sky One's history, they uncovered a pattern. Several past passengers, most of them from minority backgrounds, had lodged formal complaints claiming the airline selectively harassed them under the guise of security concerns. The complaints referenced flight attendants who would single them out for additional scrutiny, baggage checks, or seat reassignments. None of these complaints had gained significant traction individually, but altogether they painted a disturbing picture. Eric Johnson and a paralegal from Morgan & Morgan rummaged through public records, old court dockets and social media posts to compile a dossier. Among them was the story of a Latina woman forcibly removed after asking for water, too many times, apparently angering a flight attendant. Another involved an Asian couple who were separated mid-flight because the airline claimed they'd purchased the wrong seats. Both incidents had quietly settled out of court, with gag orders preventing the plaintiffs from speaking publicly. "This is more than a one-off," Eric mused in a meeting with Elena and Teresa. Sky One has systematically used vaguely defined security concerns to justify removing or harassing passengers of color. "It's a pattern." Teresa folded her arms. "We can use this to argue racial discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So, if Sky One is receiving federal funding or has federal contracts that opens them up to significant liability," Elena nodded. "So we build a case that Marcus's incident is symptomatic of institutional bias. We can sue for damages, but more importantly, for an injunction to force them to change their policies." "Yes," Eric agreed. "Though we'll need solid evidence that Sky One is indeed engaged in discriminatory practices, these older cases with gag orders might be tricky to leverage, but we can at least show they exist. Public pressure might also encourage more former passengers to come forward. In the meantime, Aunt Elena quietly reached out to potential whistleblowers within the airline's ranks. Through a friend of a friend, she made contact with a current Sky One employee, a flight attendant who wished to remain anonymous. Over a clandestine phone call, that flight attendant revealed an internal training manual that allegedly encouraged staff to pay special attention to passengers who fit certain profiles. Though the manual's language was vague, the employee claimed the hidden subtext targeted specific racial demographics. This was the bombshell Elena needed. If they could obtain a copy of that manual, or even sworn testimony about its content, Sky One's leadership would be in hot water. The challenge was getting the source to go public without losing her job or facing legal retaliation. Sky One's corporate counsel reached out to Eric Johnson, hoping to negotiate their initial offer, a modest settlement for Marcus, enough to cover psychological counseling and any missed educational opportunities. No admission of fault or official apology. Eric politely declined, stating that they were prepared to escalate the case in court. Soon after, Elena and Marcus received a cease and desist letter from Sky One's legal team, accusing them of defamation and irreparable harm to the airline's reputation. The letter demanded that Marcus and Elena refrain from making public statements about the incident. In return, the airline might reconsider an amicable settlement. The tone was thinly veiled intimidation. Elena scoffed at the letter. She forwarded it to Eric and James Carter. James published excerpts alongside a scathing editorial. Social media erupted anew, lambasting Sky One for attempting to gag the victim of discrimination rather than addressing the core issue. At this point, even major sponsors like credit card companies and travel affiliates began distancing themselves from the airline media coverage, intensified with talk shows, podcasts, and online news outlets dissecting every angle of the scandal. Public sentiment overwhelmingly sided with Marcus, who had emerged as a soft-spoken, polite teen in every interview. The airline's attempts to bully him only deepened the wave of sympathy. Sky One's CEO, John Beckford, tried to stem the tide by issuing a video statement. In a short clip, he said, "We at Sky One are committed to inclusivity. We regret any distress caused to Mr. Gilbert. We are launching a thorough internal review." Observers noted the apology was half-hearted and deflected blame onto individuals who may have overstepped rather than acknowledging systemic issues. The public wasn't buying it. In a stroke of luck or perhaps destiny, the anonymous flight attendant came forward. After weeks of quiet communication with Eleanor, the whistleblower, April Jacobs agreed to meet with Eric Johnson in person at a private location. She came armed with pages from a restricted access Sky One training guide, photocopies, highlighted sections, marginal notes from her supervisor. April's hands trembled as she handed the documents over. "I can't stand by any longer." April whispered, "Every day I see the way certain co-workers target passengers of color, especially young black men traveling alone. It makes me sick, but I was afraid I'd be fired if I spoke out." Eric skimmed the documents, eyes widening. Though carefully worded, the manual singled out profiles for potential security concerns that included descriptors overlapping with stereotypes of black and Hispanic individuals. The wording was subtle talk of urban attire, loud or boisterous behavior, traveling alone without clear purpose, but the message was unmistakable. "This is it," Eric said, gravely sharing a look with Elena. "We can argue that Sky One's policies directly encourage employees to engage in racial profiling." April nodded. "Also look at the section on how to de-escalate conflicts quickly. They basically instruct us to remove any passenger who raises their voice even slightly before the situation can spiral out of control. But that ends up disproportionately affecting people of color because they're often more scrutinized and more likely to protest if they're being unfairly treated." Elena placed a comforting hand on April's shoulder. "You've done the right thing. We'll protect you as best we can, armed with this damning evidence." The legal team prepared for a showdown. They drafted an extensive complaint, referencing the training manual, the previous passenger complaints, and Marcus's specific ordeal. They sought injunctive relief, punitive damages, and a public admission of wrongdoing. They filed it in federal court under the Civil Rights Act, which would grant them a broader platform to expose the airline's practices. As the lawsuit documents became public, the revelation of Sky One's internal manual made headlines everywhere. News outlets broadcast the story like wildfire. The airline's stock price plummeted, and major investors began calling for the ouster of CEO John Beckford. The environment at Sky One headquarters grew frantic with daily emergency meetings as they tried to contain the fallout. Marcus, in the eye of the hurricane, could hardly process how fast his life had changed. One week he was a teenager, excited for summer camp. The next, he was a central figure in a civil rights battle. Reporters requested interviews almost daily. Supporters flooded his social media with encouraging messages, and many parents expressed horror at imagining their own children in his shoes. Alicia wrestled with a mix of pride and concern. She worried about the toll this public fight might take on Marcus's emotional well-being, yet she knew that stepping back would mean letting an injustice stand. Elena reassured her sister, promising that they'd find time for Marcus to just be a teenager amidst all the turmoil. Despite the chaos, Marcus found solace in the camp's robotics lab and the newfound friends who stood firmly by his side. They'd gather at lunch to talk about the daily developments, sometimes watching the news on a common TV in the dorm lounge. Kids from all backgrounds approached him, some shyly sharing their own experiences of racial profiling or microaggressions. Marcus realized that in standing up for himself, he was standing up for so many others. Meanwhile, a broad coalition of activists, politicians, and celebrities joined the FACT, Justice for Marcus movement. High-profile figures tweeted their solidarity. The NAACP orchestrated a protest outside Sky One's headquarters in Dallas, where hundreds of people marched with signs that read, "End racial profiling in the skies and flying while black shouldn't be a crime." The day of the preliminary hearing in federal court arrived. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as Eleanor Alicia and Marcus stepped out of a black SUV. Their attorney, Eric Johnson, carried a briefcase full of documents and a confident air. On the other side, a group of stern-faced lawyers flanked Sky One CEO John Beckford, who looked exhausted and visibly unnerved. Proceedings began with arguments over whether the judge should impose an injunction, forcing Sky One to halt certain discriminatory practices. Immediately, Eric presented the newly uncovered training manual, pointing to highlighted portions and citing testimonies from past passengers. Sky One's legal team tried to argue that the manual was outdated, misinterpreted, and not representative of official policy. They insisted the flight attendants acted on a misunderstanding of Marcus's ticket status. Judge Ralston, a calm, meticulous jurist, asked pointed questions. If this manual was discontinued, why was it still in circulation? Why didn't the airline address these previous harassment complaints more transparently? Sky One's lawyers stammered through vague explanations. By the hearing's end, the judge signaled he was inclined to issue a partial injunction, forbidding Sky One from removing passengers based solely on the ill-defined criteria in the manual. The final decision would come within days. While this was only the preliminary round, the blow to Sky One's defense was substantial. In the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters thronged around Marcus and Eleanor. Microphones jostled for space. Elena, always poised, spoke into the cameras. This is about more than Marcus. This is about ensuring no person, regardless of age, race, or background, is subject to arbitrary humiliation under the guise of security. Sky One can no longer hide behind these biased policies. In the weeks following the bombshell revelations about Sky One's hidden policies and racially charged practices, the airline's foundations began to buckle under the weight of public outrage. Social media condemnation had grown into a deafening roar, with boycotts and protests springing up in major cities. Prominent influencers and community organizers urged travelers to switch carriers, and many heeded the call. Once bustling Sky One, check-in counters at airports across the nation were reduced to ghost towns. As bookings plummeted, so did the airline's financial stability. Investors grew jittery watching the company's stock price fall in near free fall. Even longtime partners, credit card companies and hotel chains started cutting ties, fearing they'd be tainted by association. Within a month, Sky One's market value had dropped precipitously, wiping out millions in shareholder investments. Senior executives scrambled to contain the damage, holding late-night crisis summits in lavish boardrooms, where hushed voices echoed with desperation. John Beckford, the embattled CEO, appeared on multiple news segments, attempting to reassure the public. Each interview, however, was met with skepticism. His repeated claim that the airline was the victim of a few rogue employees fell flat, especially after internal memos and the discriminatory training manual became public. where once he'd held a commanding presence, his tall, distinguished figure a symbol of corporate confidence. Beckford now looked haggard. Grey circles under his eyes, betraying the strain industry observers speculated he was days away from being forced out by the board. Yet the deeper reckoning was happening within Sky One's own ranks. Flight attendants and ground staff found themselves questioned by furious passengers, many of whom demanded answers or vented frustrations at anyone wearing a Sky One uniform. Some employees feared layoffs or pay cuts as the airline's revenue dwindled. Others questioned their own complicity, wondering whether their everyday actions had contributed to a hostile atmosphere for passengers of color. In one particularly harrowing incident, a Sky One gate agent broke down in tears while speaking to a group of travelers in Minneapolis. The agent tearfully apologized on behalf of the company, admitting she felt powerless and ashamed for not speaking up sooner about the discriminatory undertones in the airline's policies. A passenger recorded the emotional moment on a cell phone, and the footage quickly went viral, underscoring the deep divisions within the company. Meanwhile, the leadership vacuum in the executive suite grew more apparent. Each new lawsuit by now, several passengers had joined Marcus's cause, alleging similar or related instances of profiling chipped away at Sky One's remaining credibility. The legal department was inundated with requests for emergency meetings, settlement negotiations, and frantic phone calls from anxious board members. Morale fell further when employees noticed that high-level executives were quietly polishing their resumes and jumping ship seeking new opportunities before the airline's fate was sealed. Public relations crises came in waves. First, there were chaotic scenes of passengers trying to rebook cancelled flights because of staff shortages. Then rumors leaked that the airline was taking out high-interest loans just to make payroll. Local news stations captured footage of harried Sky One supervisors addressing lines of angry customers who, upon discovering cancellations, demanded refunds on the spot. Each televised meltdown was another blow to the company's name, making it obvious that the meltdown was more than a minor setback. It was a total collapse. Desperate to salvage Sky One's reputation, a faction within the board tried floating a rebranding strategy. They proposed a name change, a brand new color scheme, and an advertising campaign proclaiming the company's commitment to equitable travel. But these efforts were too little, too late. Social media users mocked the rebranding as a cynical attempt to cover up systematic wrongdoing. Rather than a genuine transformation, shareholders threatened legal action against the executive team, alleging gross mismanagement. Behind closed doors, the board held an emergency vote. Half of them demanded Beckford's immediate removal, while others feared such a move could spark further instability. The debate grew heated, with longtime allies turning on each other. Ultimately, the board was forced to concede that firing the CEO wouldn't fix the structural rot that had taken hold of the company. They needed a full overhaul, possibly even a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. The consensus was bleak. Sky One's liability was mounting, and public trust was beyond repair. Then came the tipping point. On a bright Monday morning, the airline's official website abruptly displayed a stark message. Sky One Airways is suspending all operations until further notice. We apologize for any inconvenience. Soon after, a bombshell press release confirmed that all flights were cancelled. Effective immediately, stranded passengers at airports from Seattle to Miami found themselves scrambling for alternative arrangements. Hundreds of news outlets reported the shutdown within minutes, labeling it one of the swiftest corporate downfalls in modern aviation history. Internally, confusion and disarray reigned. Employees learned about the suspension of operations through media outlets before management could send out memos. Many called each other in disbelief, uncertain if they still had jobs. Some made last-ditch attempts to help passengers find flights on other airlines. A final act of goodwill amid the chaos, but the damage was irreversible. Industry analysts concluded that Sky One's liabilities far exceeded its assets, making a buyout or full liquidation the only pathways left. As the dust settled, it was clear that Sky One had lost any chance of redemption. Multiple lawsuits, including Marcus's landmark case, pressed forward in court. The brand was irreparably tarnished, a cautionary tale of what happens when institutional bias festers behind a veneer of corporate promises. Hard karma had indeed come calling, exacting a price far steeper than anyone in Sky One's upper echelon could ever have anticipated. In the wake of Sky One's abrupt shutdown, a collective gasp rippled through the aviation industry. Passengers, employees, and even rival airlines watched in stunned silence as the once ambitious budget carrier seemingly evaporated overnight. Major airports that had boasted prominent Sky One terminals were left with empty gates and boarded-up kiosks. Long lines of stranded customers, some with children in tow, flooded help desks, demanding urgent rebookings on any carrier that could take them. News cameras zoomed in on tear-streaked faces, illustrating a scene of mass confusion and disbelief. Across social media, however, the reaction was anything but mournful. Waves of posts declared this the final blow of karma against a company that had for too long fostered discriminatory policies. Memes juxtaposed Sky One's early ads promoting comfort and courtesy, with headlines about the forced removal of Marcus and others who had been profiled and humiliated. Commentators latched onto the phrase, "hard karma hits back," tweeting it alongside clips of flight attendants, sneering at passengers of color, and screenshots of that damning training manual. A surge of viral TikTok videos portrayed mock airline training sessions, calling out the racism lurking beneath corporate veneers. For many, Sky One's downfall was not merely justice, it was poetic justice. Meanwhile, the airline's collapse sent shockwaves through the personal lives of those who had once banked their livelihoods on the carrier's success. Thousands of frontline employees received automated emails informing them of immediate termination due to insolvency, leaving them with no paycheck, no severance, and no clarity on their future. Some flight attendants who had built entire lives around the hectic schedule of back-to-back routes were abruptly grounded. Worse still were the conscientious workers who had privately opposed Sky One's biased culture, desperately hoping for reforms that never came. Now they bore the brunt of the company's demise unemployed and bearing the stigma of working for a disgraced airline. For CEO John Beckford, there was no graceful exit. Already under fire for his botched media appearances, he found himself a pariah in the business community. Former allies distanced themselves, citing his gross mismanagement and failure to address systemic issues. Whispers circulated that Beckford's name was on an industry-wide blacklist. No boardroom wanted to be associated with the executive whose inaction had toppled a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Even the board members who had once championed him now lamented their decision, calling him a negligent figurehead who had ignored red flags and whistleblower warnings. It was a ruthless reversal of fortune for a man who had once swaggered with corporate bravado. Yet the most powerful testament to how deeply Sky One's downfall resonated came from those who had endured unjust treatment in silence for years. Encouraged by Marcus's public stand, dozens of people who'd previously accepted small settlements or gag orders stepped forward to share their stories of discrimination. A father recounted how he and his teenage son were forced to deplane after the son requested a seat switch too aggressively. A middle-aged black woman tearfully recalled being labeled belligerent for insisting she had the correct boarding pass. Their voices, once relegated to the margins, found new volume in the national spotlight, amplifying the conversation around institutional bias. In tandem with these testimonies, civil rights organizations declared Sky One's collapse a watershed moment. The NAACP released a powerful statement emphasizing that while the airline's failure might seem catastrophic, it was also an overdue reckoning. Real change rarely comes without real consequences. The statement read, "The story of Sky One reminds us that corporate malfeasance, especially when rooted in bias, cannot and will not stand in the court of public opinion." Other advocacy groups echoed these sentiments, launching campaigns to demand transparency from all airlines regarding their security and passenger removal protocols. Amid the swirl of praise and condemnation, Marcus grappled with a whirlwind of emotions. Although he felt vindicated, knowing his case had helped shine a light on corporate wrongdoing, he also wrestled with empathy for the innocent employees now left jobless. Late at night, he and his aunt Elena discussed the moral complexity of celebrating an airline's demise. Elena reassured him that the true culprits were those at the top whose policies created and perpetuated the discriminatory climate. Still, Marcus carried a lingering ache, a reminder that real change sometimes arrived with painful collateral damage. Nonetheless, the public's perception of Marcus evolved from that of a frightened teenager to a symbol of principled defiance. Journalists interviewed him about whether he considered Sky One's downfall to be fair punishment. He answered thoughtfully, saying he hoped the collapse would be a wake-up call for all companies to confront institutional prejudice head-on. A wave of young people took his words to heart, circulating them across social media as a rallying cry for broader reforms beyond the airline industry. Teachers assigned projects on Marcus's story, prompting class debates on how systemic bias could be challenged in everyday life. Even beyond the court proceedings, the wider aviation sector felt the aftershocks of Sky One's downfall. Competitor airlines scrambled to update their training manuals, releasing PR statements about renewed commitments to inclusivity. Some instituted mandatory diversity workshops, hoping to avoid a fate similar to Sky One's. The Federal Aviation Administration hinted at a regulatory review aimed at establishing clearer guidelines for passenger removal. Industry experts agreed that the entire fiasco had permanently altered the discourse around what it meant to ensure safety and comfort on board commercial flights. In the end, Sky One's implosion and the backlash that followed served as a grim cautionary tale. Institutions built on shaky ethical foundations are destined to collapse under the slightest scrutiny. For passengers, the message was equally clear. Collective resistance and fearless whistleblowing can dismantle even the most entrenched corporate wrongs. The public watched in awe, some with relief, others with apprehension, as hard karma tore through the airline's very existence. What started as an isolated act of injustice, kicking a black teenager off a plane, had mushroomed into a cultural reckoning, one that proved the wheels of karma can turn swiftly and with devastating force. In the aftermath, Marcus's life resumed, albeit forever changed. He finished his summer camp and did exceptionally well in the robotics competition, earning second place with his team's innovative drone design. The experience left him more determined to pursue a career in engineering, fueled by a new understanding of social justice. Elena returned to her advocacy work, more motivated than ever. She used the Sky One case as a platform to discuss corporate discrimination, speaking at conferences and universities around the country. Her vow was to ensure that no young black traveler or person of color would have to endure what Marcus had. Alicia felt immense relief, seeing her son come out of the ordeal stronger and more introspective. She supported him in telling his story, encouraging him to mentor younger kids about self-advocacy. Within months, the remains of Sky-One were sold off to a competitor airline under new ownership, and a rebranded name they tried to distance themselves from the fiasco, implementing a strict zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. The entire corporate culture had to be rebuilt from scratch, a testament to how destructive unchecked prejudice can be. As for Marcus, he moved forward with the knowledge that he had sparked real change. He still had nightmares about that smirking flight attendant. But each day, it hurt a little less. The future looked bright, paved with the lessons of standing up, speaking truth and never letting injustice go unchallenged. He also carried something intangible yet powerful, the unwavering love and support of a family, especially a fierce aunt who refused to remain silent. Their courage combined with public unity had toppled a giant. It was the ultimate proof that when good people come together, no force, no matter how big or well-funded, can escape justice forever. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey of courage, determination, and ultimate triumph. Marcus's story reminds us that even in the face of blatant injustice, truth finds a way to shine through. It's not just about one teenager on one flight. It's about challenging the hidden biases that can lurk within corporate policies and everyday interactions. By daring to stand up, Marcus and his Aunt Elena helped spark real change, proving that compassion and resilience can topple even the mightiest Goliaths. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes to how discrimination can be dismantled, please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps spread messages of hope, unity, and justice far and wide. Together we can continue shedding light on hidden truths and championing the rights of every individual.